Thank you, Rick. That was a very generous and kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be back at Bethlehem Baptist Church and to be sitting with my mentor and friend, Dr. John Piper. Steve Nichols, who is here and whom you will hear from tomorrow, he and I co-edited this series, and both of us are historians and lovers of church history. But we really wanted to put together these volumes and to get some of our favorite people to contribute to them, not merely so that you would learn more about figures from church history, but so that you would know the Lord more deeply and have these wonderful saints from the past, through the means of current friends and theologians and teachers, help us all understand the Christian life and how to walk with Jesus and know Jesus better. So we are thrilled and we are thankful. And we're going to start the event with really an hour-long conversation with Dr. Piper to talk about history. He was not a contributor to the series, but he has been a friend and supporter of it and has his own personal history with church history and with biography. So we thought it might be fruitful and helpful to sit and talk about it together. I'll give you my mini theology of introductions. I believe in keeping them short and sweet. You don't want to come here to hear introductions, so I will give, for each person who speaks, just a very short introduction to who they are. And of course, this is a man who needs very little introduction, was the pastor here at Bethlehem Baptist Church for over 30 years, is the founder and teacher at Desiring God, and currently serves as chancellor at Bethlehem College and Seminary. Thank you for sitting down and having this conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
So let's start by talking about your own personal history when it comes to biography, church history, heroes of the faith. Do you have early experiences did you read missionary biographies when you were a kid? Did you have an interest in history growing up? I'm testing your memory to start out.
I didn't read anything as a kid, okay? I hated to read. I think I read my first book that didn't have pictures in it when I was in the 11th grade. I remember 6th grade, they put stars on a chart, so you get a star for every chapter you make. And I looked for picture books and just flipped through them and put my star up there. I hated to read, and that's probably because I'm slow and probably more dyslexic than I know. So no, I don't remember reading any biography in high school or junior high or before that, though I may have. My memory is blurry, really blurry, when it comes to my youth. So here's Wheaton now, and can't remember reading any biography there either. Let's see. You remember me reading a biography? I remember Dietrich Bonhoeffer coming onto my horizon, I don't know, sometime at Wheaton, and I read The Cost of Discipleship and wanted to know more about this man's sacrifice, this man's life. That felt big. I did fall in love with reading in the 11th grade and have never stopped reading since. So something happened. Mrs. Clanton happened. And I don't know what she said or did, but there she was, an English teacher in the 11th grade, and everything turned on under her teaching. So I did become a reader, though I'm super slow, and we can talk more about that later, how you do these things when you can't read much. So a little bit, but when I went to seminary, I started to meet the people that would change my life, Jonathan Edwards. And I don't remember reading a biography during seminary, but when I headed to Germany, I do remember a bunch. Well, I take that back. The summer after I graduated, or maybe it was summer between junior and senior year, I read The Minority of One by Clyde Kilby, a biography of Jonathan Blanchard, the founder of Wheaton College. And I read it not because...
Kilby was your professor.
Kilby was a very moving professor, and that's why I read it. I didn't give a hoot about Jonathan Blanchard. But I loved Clyde Kilby. I loved everything that came out of his mouth in class. I loved the way he saw the world. I loved the way he wrote. I loved the way he laughed. I love his rosy cheeks. He looked like he'd been drinking. But you can't drink at Wheaton, so I assume it was something else. Happy. And he wrote this biography of the founder. And I remember sitting on a pink chair in our living room at 122 Bailey Boulevard, loving this biography because of how tangible it felt, how living it was, how well written it was, how beautiful it was, how it focused on real life and touchable things. That's what Kilby was. He was the embodiment of Lewis for me. We get to Lewis maybe later, but so I remember reading that one. I also remember reading, since we're on Kilby, in Germany, went to Ludwig Maximilians Universität, and I went through the card catalog looking for Clyde Kilby in Germany because I just felt hungry for Clyde Kilby. And lo and behold, they had a book called Colonial Heroes. And Kilby had written a chapter on David Brainerd. And I remember reading it, and I remember one thing, and it was deeply moving. This is why I say books don't change your life, sentences do. He said, with a kind of sigh and ache and almost tears, oh, that David Brainerd could have seen the world, the wilderness of New England, the way his mentor saw it. Meaning, you read 500 pages of David Brainerd's journals, living among Indians in the wilderness, and you will not find one sentence about the beauty of nature. Edwards loved spiders, clouds, grass, fields. Edwards saw the world and everything in it as a type of God, pointing to God. And Brainerd was a sick man. He was mentally ill. And he had leukemia almost his entire adult life, and he dies at age 29 as a tragic hero. And Jonathan Edwards, this is a lesson about biography, Jonathan Edwards takes the life of this broken man, pouring his life out for the salvation of Indians, seeing little revivals, he pours his life into a book, a journal. He publishes the journals. That book may have been the most important thing for the spread of the kingdom Edwards ever did, just to tell that man, just to give to the world that man's life. But Kilby's rendering was tragic. It was a tragic life to the glory of God, and part of it was because he was so introspective, he couldn't see sunrises, he couldn't see sunsets. And so I remember that, and I read one other thing. I read 3 biographies of Edwards in Germany. Ola Winslow, Perry Miller, I forget what the other one was. And so I met Edwards in seminary, really, but I didn't read any. I don't think I read a biography there. But while I'm all alone, I'm sitting in my little rocking chair with my wife in Germany and loving my friend Jonathan Edwards.
And for people who don't know your own biography, after you finished your doctoral work in Germany, you moved to the Twin Cities and taught biblical studies at Bethel College for 6 years. Any biographies or history stand out to you in that time period that you made it a point to try to read figures from the past or learn more about certain folks, or not?
I think I read another biography or two about Edwards, and maybe others, but I don't remember biography standing out during those academic teaching years. I sort of was trying to be a scholar, meaning write technical stuff that nobody reads. And so I was really, reading in another world. I was trying to stay up on German scholarship and learning French in the summer so I could say the last word on Romans 9, and so I wasn't spending my I was going to say, I wasn't spending my downtime reading biography, but I remember one time, this is irrelevant, but it's fun. It is fun. I decided, everybody's talking about C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. I'm 32 years old and I've never read them. So I said, okay, I'm going to stop working at 5:15 instead of 5:30. We eat at 5:30, on schedule. Noel, my partner, everything's on schedule. We're going to eat at 5:30. I'm going to stop working at 5:15, and every day I'm reading 15 minutes in the Chronicles of Narnia. And I read straight through them. And I'd go upstairs and Noel would say, well, what happened? I said, they were in a battle and it was 5:30. And she'd say, I can't believe you. I said, well, 15 minutes a day, you get it done. Chop the tree down. But got to eat at 5:30.
It's discipline. Now, in 1980, you come to this church, you take this pastorate, you leave the academic world, you become a pastor. And if any thoughts come to mind or memories from engaging with biography, I know in particular maybe a prompt for you is you've mentioned reading Warren Wiersbe's little biographical sketches.
Yeah, there's 3 of those. And I got them out this afternoon because I thought you might ask me that. The one's called Walking with the Giants, one's called Listening to the Giants, and one's called Giant Steps. And I think he kept writing them because they were popular. And they're like little teeny biographies, like 3 pages. And oh my, were they inspiring. But you know, I looked at it this afternoon and I thought, I hardly put any markings in these. I mean, that's weird. I don't read anything without marking it up. And it makes me wonder, did I start marking stuff up later? Or did I not? I don't know why that was. But anyway, I remember being inspired by these because I was utterly green as a pastor, right? I'd never been a pastor. I skipped all the practical courses in seminary, and I came here never having baptized anybody, never having visited anybody in the hospital, never having done a funeral, having done 1 wedding in my life, maybe preached 15 sermons, and I'm the pastor of a 700-member church with 300 old people there on Sunday morning. Well, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything except my Bible, which is all you need to know. So I'd skip those courses again. So I began to read, and I do remember my conscience being really pricked by reading pastors. And The Reformed Pastor is not a biography, but it was plenty biographical, autobiographical, Richard Baxter and good. And I just thought, if that's the way you do it, I'm dead in the water, because this man took his whole city and visited everybody in it every year until the place was Christian through and through. And I thought, oh my goodness, how do you do that in Philip's neighborhood? And so, yeah. So it was about 8 years. This may be getting ahead of ourselves, but between the beginning of the pastorate in 1980 and when the pastors' conference started.
It seems like one possible lesson of application is you don't need to read a 300-page biography or 400-page biography in order to be instructed, edified, inspired. It seemed like you really got your start by reading sketches. Sketches,
yeah, right. In fact, I think except for really good biographies, you can get discouraged. I'm discouraged right now reading. I've never read a biography of John Wesley. Like that's shameful. So I checked around. What's the best biography on John Wesley? Rational Enthusiast, I think it's called, something like that, or Enthusiastic Rationalist. It's a very technical biography by, oh shoot, I should have checked. It's sitting there on my table. It's been sitting there for months because I'm so bored by it. And I got to finish this. Now that's not a good, I mean, you'll get ruined for biography if you rack, it rhymes with rack. The last name rhymes with rack. The author, I bet somebody in here knows the book. Anybody know the book? No, it's not. It's I wouldn't know it. I mean, you should know it. It's a disappointing read, but Mark Knoll thinks it's the best one.
He's getting like an anti-blurb for it, right?
Yeah. So the point there is you can get a big, thick biography and be really, really discouraged because the most recent one by a scholar at Edinburgh on John Knox just came out about 2 years ago. I found that one disappointing. And I struggled to get through it because I'd never read one on Knox. And you got to know Knox. Why haven't I done a biography of Knox here at the Pastors Conference? And I said, well, this is just not inspiring. So there's something about a good, if you're going to hold your mind for 300, 400 pages on a life, it better be a good story. It better be a good told story with insight into heart and mind and relationships, not just facts. And it takes an unusual gift to write a good biography. There aren't many of them.
Yeah, so let's talk about good biographies and what makes a good biography. As Dane Ortland and I were riding over here from the hotel, we were talking together about the fact that, let's say you have a fantastic biography, you could read someone's life and write down every principle and lesson of application that you learned from the biography. But why aren't just a list of the principles effective in and of themselves? What makes biography done well so much more compelling and grip us and give fresh insights rather than just, a list of 22 lessons from the life of Spurgeon or Edwards?
One way to say it would be that a well-written biography, that is the narrative of a person's life with an attention to the surroundings, the heart, the mind, the family, the sufferings, so that he lives or she lives, is what the Bible tells us to do in Hebrews 13:7. So remember those who spoke to you the word of God. Pay attention, ana theoreo. Look carefully at the ekbasis anastasis, or anastrophe, the outcome of their life and their faith. Okay, there's a lot in that verse. And it surely is warranting chapter 11, all right? So those who spoke to you the word of God, and Abel's blood is still speaking even though he's dead. Everybody in chapter 11 is dead. They're all dead. Which means that all these people were supposed to consider their lives and the outcome of their faith are dead people. And we're supposed to look at something there and get lessons or living experiences of how they lived. So how did Moses escape from the fleeting pleasures of Egypt? He looked to the reward. So if you spell that out over a lifetime, that would be a powerful lesson to learn. So I think the answer why biography is compelling is because it has a biblical warrant. God, the main reason you should all, I hope you're all at this conference, the main reason you're at this conference is because you should be asking, what's the point of my life? Why am I on the planet? And the answer is, you're on the planet to become holy and happy to the glory of God. That's why you're here. Okay, then you should ask, how does the Bible teach you become holy and happy? And one of the ways it says is to imitate me, Paul says. Imitate me. Fix your eyes on those who walk according to the example that you have in me. Wow. God has appointed that I would become happier in God and holy by looking at holy people. He said so. and most of them are dead. And so choose carefully those people who can best be a part of God's means of making you holy and making you happy, and thus, through your gifts, useful. It has, another way to say it, besides the biblical connection, is systematic theology, church history, biblical theology. Those are all slices of looking at reality. A good biography is psychology, it's history, it's politics, it's family relations, it's piety, it's suffering, it's what makes us smile and cry. People want to live. We want to live. We don't just want to think, right? We want to be happy, and we want to grieve well and laugh well and love well and walk well and look at the sky well. Well, you don't get that from a lot of books, but a well-written biography that's narrating the life of a person living that full, it draws you out of yourself so that you feel possibilities of life. Maybe that's it. You feel possibilities of life. Here's one more thing that came to my mind recently. If God is calling you, which He is, to grow in the grace and knowledge of God, if He's calling you to become more happy in Him, more holy in Him, and He's calling you to become wiser, that's what I spoke on this morning. He's calling you to become wiser. You've got maybe, 70, 80 years to work on that? If you learn it all in the last decade, you've got no time to use it. So you need to learn it early. Early is short, right? 30, 40, 50 years. And our experience is so narrow, right? I mean, your little life, there's 7 billion people. There's 12,000 cultures. There's 7,000 languages. You don't know anything, right? You're just little teeny weeny. We're all just in our little cocoon of reality in America, in our little evangelical pond. Well, guess what? You can speed up that movie. That's a slow movie and it's narrow, right? Your life is a slow movie and it's narrow. You gotta speed it up. You know how you speed it up? Go to school, read a book, meaning put the movie on fast forward by reading a life. So here's a man, here's Edwards or here's Cooper or whatever, and you can read this book in 2 weeks. A whole life in 2 weeks. Well, it would take you a life to live a life. And now you get to live a life in 2 weeks. And think, if you learn 10 awesome things that he learned from suffering or from success or failure, if you learn those 10 things, they would have taken you 10 years because you won't bump into those circumstances till you're 35 or 45. You won't have your midlife crisis till you're 41 and a half. And if you could read a story of a man who walked through that, you could read that story in 30 minutes and be ready to meet it when it comes. Awesome. So reading biography or taking courses or going to school or having good friends that can tell you ahead of you, it's all part of the same thing. God has ordained that we not learn all of our wisdom by living it. It's too late. You just can't get enough experience in 70 years. You've got to have help, and you can just put that thing on supercharge with good biographies.
That's really, really helpful. And, one of our hearts behind this whole conference is we want people going back and reading the primary sources, actually hearing from these people directly, not just through intermediaries. But one of the things about this series is that you have somebody like Tony Reinke who has read everything that John Newton has written and tried to collate them.
Very discouraging. I love Tony. You here, Tony? Wave your hand.
It's his wife's birthday tonight.
Okay, wife's birthday.
So
what
he is wisely
excuses.
He's a good husband. But you get these guys who've read 10 biographies and tried to distill the best possible principles. So that's one of the ways that we hope this
I don't do it that way.
So you started doing the biographical addresses with Edwards in 88?
Yes.
Was that the first year? So it was here at the, a little further.
This building wasn't here in 88.
This building didn't exist, but right down there,
Yep.
you gave the first biographical address on Edwards to a group of pastors. Do you remember how many were there?
80.
Okay, 80 pastors. So what made, you had read a lot about Edwards. What made you want to give an hour-long address on his life with lessons for pastors in particular?
That's an easy question to answer, because in the years from 80 to 88, really 87, I was listening to biography or biographical addresses by Ian Murray. Unsurpassed. I just think Ian Murray is off the charts effective in his quiet British way, off the charts effective in telling stories and drawing out lessons. So he was my model. I listened to him on Spurgeon, and can you imagine somebody criticizing Charles Spurgeon? I mean, just think of it. And Ian Murray said, now the problem with Spurgeon's preaching, and I'm thinking, there were problems? The problem with Spurgeon's preaching is that he never preached on the moral law. Can't find any series on the Ten Commandments. Oh, whoa, that's the sort of thing you get in good biography. Like, whoa, eyes go open and you think something. So anyway, I'm listening to these, maybe half a dozen. Everyone I could find, tapes. They were called cassette tapes. And I'd stick them in a Walkman, tie it around my waist, take off. So there, he was the model, and I thought to myself, those are so meaningful to me, so inspiring to me as a young pastor, that I want to do that. And so I did it every year for 25 years, I think, or 27, whatever it was.
You conceived of it from the beginning as an annual thing?
I did, yeah. I didn't know we could keep doing these conferences. You know, first time you do something, you don't know if it's going to work or not. But the guys who came said, let's do it again, and so we did it again. And we did it we're still doing it. Edwards was number one because he's been number one. He's number one in my life, number one in my influence. So I prepared that for that first conference.
And why not just recommend that other people read biography? What do you think is important about pastors? I know not everybody here is a pastor, but you recommend that pastors actually present to their people biography. Why not just say, we've got a book stall out there and I want you all to read Ian Murray on Edwards? What is it about presenting that is particularly helpful, you think?
It's short. Half the people in your churches aren't readers. I remember sitting one time, David Livingston sitting out there, he remembers this when we were sitting with a friend at my house from Olivet Baptist Church, and David leans over to him and says, I'll make up a name, Tom. I said, Tom, what you reading? And Tom looked at him and said, I don't read. And David didn't believe him. He said, I mean, just like magazine, newspaper, whatever. He said, I don't read. Remember that, David? It was so embarrassing. You've got a lot of people out there like that, but they'll come on Sunday night. We used to have Sunday night services here, and that's where I did Cooper. And my experience of doing Cooper before people, not pastors, but people, I got more feedback of encouragement from the life of William Cooper on a Sunday night service than I think anything I've ever done. And I thought, whoa, that's number one because he was depressed all of his life and tried to kill himself 3 times. And number two, because people love stories, they love lives, they love lessons that are, strong meat in good stories. And so it's good for your people. That's the first thing I'd say. It's good for your people. It's good for their souls. And it'll inspire them then maybe to go get a book. And it's good for you because I find now that I'm not under pressure to produce a weekly sermon, and I'm not under pressure to produce a biography, it's easy for me to read. It's in and out. It's just in and out. Because the pressure's not on to prepare anything with it, do anything with it. It's just pleasure. Well, that's got its place, but oh my, the fruit for our souls when we're forced or have the discipline to collect insights, organize them, put them in a useful form. And we took a whole conference to make the point, the effort to say is a way of seeing. And so a pastor who tries to say helpful things will see more helpful things. So it's good for your own soul and it's good for your people.
What was your method that you used, or would you recommend to others? Somebody who says, I want to get into Spurgeon. I want to take this year and make this the year of Charles Spurgeon, the year of Lloyd Jones, the year of Luther. What should they do? How do they pick out a biography? How do they make it so that they're not just data in and they forget it? What did you do?
Okay, let's see if I keep this short, because it got down to a science, because there were 25 of them. I chose the biography just by what major theological / pastoral figure I didn't know anything about and thought I should. Seemed to rise to the surface of influence. So that's kind of how I chose. I mean, George Herbert wouldn't be in that category, but I love George Herbert and I love poetry, and so let's do poetry one year. So I chose them at least by the summer before the January when the pastors' conference was. And I took a biography or two on vacation and tried to read it. That's all I did on vacation when I was reading, wasn't with the family, I was reading this biography. And I'm underlining it and marking it, little things in the margin, not writing anything down usually, little notes in the front. So I read that. And then after vacation, if I didn't have time to read more, try to read another one. So if I could, I'd read two, a substantial one and an inspirational one. Shorter, longer, technical, less technical, and underline them both. And then I knew that if I'm going to have any authenticity at all, I need to read some original stuff. Letters, journals, sermons. Got to get into what they really say, because what people say, good grief, that's just so off sometimes. And you need to read the original stuff, which I'm glad you're doing what you're doing here in this series. So through the fall, I'd be reading that. So come January now, I've read all I have time to read. And here's the great thing. I mean, you should know these. Where's that book? You carry that book around? Is that my book?
Nope.
Okay. These are not scholarly. They're not impressive. They are what you can do when you have 9 months. And I just want to encourage pastors, don't be daunted. Your people don't know any better. They don't know anything about Spurgeon. 9 months of reading in Spurgeon, you'll be an absolute expert as far as they're concerned. And you'll be an idiot as far as Spurgeon scholars are concerned. Now, if you let that daunt you, you'll never do anything. You'll never do anything. So I said to myself, look, what I'm doing is preaching a sermon on a point I want to make. And I happen to use Spurgeon. I'm unashamed about that. I'm preaching with these biographies. So that's what you got here. I'm not trying to fool anybody like these are scholarly, dispassionate, objective stories. Baloney. I don't even believe in that. So I read as much as I could read, and it wasn't a lot. And now here's January, and we have these remember those? Went off by ourselves for 4 days to northern Minnesota with the whole staff, called Study Break. And my job on Study Break was a brain dump from all those books onto the computer. I didn't start these till post-computer. Got my first computer in '85. We started this in '87. However, I didn't think ahead that there's such a thing as dictation software. I don't think it existed maybe in '88. So for years, I'm typing flat out quotes from books onto a document. Just quotes. 60 single-space pages by the end of those 4 days, give or take. And then that's as far as I can get. Now, about 10 years into that, I started using drag and dictate. Whoa, did that save a lot of time. So I'm just reading these quotes into my computer. Awesome. Wow, I love it. And now I'm home, And I set aside, maybe 3 or 4 days before the conference to do something with that 60 pages of quotes. And here's how I did it. And I would recommend you consider this. I put it in a Word doc, and I went up to the top and I pushed the button that says number the paragraphs. Creates 400 paragraphs. 400 paragraphs, all with a little number in front of them. And then I read through, and I'm aiming now to make some sense out of this hodgepodge of 400 paragraphs of quotations from all over the universe on this person. And so I've got this second document, and I put a number 1. And number 1 is family. And everything relating to family, the numbers that correspond to those paragraphs are going right there. 1. So 6, 18, 300, 492 are right there. When I'm done with that first pass, I've got about 60 or 70 numbers with lots of little numbers, and this is my first organization of all that mass. Now, while this is happening, ideas are coming to my head of what I want to do, all right? What I want to say and how I might say it. And I'm making my own little notes are in there in red or something. And I got one more pass now, and I've got to go through there and come out with not a gazillion quotes, but enough order that I can start writing. And I start writing, and sometimes the writing just takes over and it goes in a totally different direction, which is okay. But that's basically the way I did it. It took about 7 months to do all the reading and writing.
Let's talk about different approaches to history and biography. You've already mentioned Ian Murray and how much you were helped by his work and his approach. George Marsden would be another historian who does biography. I didn't look up how old the two of them are, but similar age. Maybe Ian Murray's a little bit older. Both have written on your favorite theologian, Jonathan Edwards. How would you describe the differences between the two of them and what you might benefit one from the other?
Yeah. This is a technical debate that you historians know more about, way more than I do, between scholars like Mark Noll and George Marsden and Grant Wacker and Joel Carpenter and those evangelical historians and Ian Murray, me. And Mark, I love Mark. We graduated together. We're going to have dinner together in a few weeks down at Wheaton at our 50th reunion. Mark would call what Ian Murray does tribal history, meaning that he writes with a perfectly open evidence that he is he believes what Edwards wrote. He believes in providence, controlling events, and he is totally empathetic with Edwards, and he's not trying to assume a position of neutrality or distance. That would be tribal, because the tribe is going to read that and like it, and the secular scholars are going to read that and say, probably not too reliable because it's too biased, something like that. Whereas they would want to write with at least visible assumptions that the guild in the universities, who are not necessarily evangelical or Christian, could read with high level of expectation and respect. So you get Harry Stout on Whitefield, you get Marsden on Edwards. The interesting thing, I mean, this is my take. This is a continuum and not an either or, right? This is not, here's one kind of historiography, here's the other kind, clear break, no way. When I read Marsden, I expected something like Stout on Whitefield, which I thought was awful. Snide. At least the first half, something happened to him. I mean, he got saved or something. I like Harry Stout, too. Wish he may watch this. Love you, Harry. But something changed in the middle of that book. It's just snide up front, and I did not like it. I didn't think it was good history, didn't think it was good attitude. But there's nothing like that in Marsden. Not a whiff. Marsden is about as about as high-level, serious historian as you can get, and I could smell his love for Edwards. I could smell it, and he couldn't hide it, and I doubt that he was trying to hide it. So I think it's probably possible to write an excellent scholarly biography that wins a hearing in the wider world and is not snide about your subject matter, trying to distance yourself from it in some way. And he just says flat out at the end that he's who he is. And so I think I loved both of those biographies, Ian Murray and George Marsden. And they are different. Here's a difference, but I just saw this afternoon. So somebody would say, okay, Marsden at least admitted that Jonathan Edwards owned a slave. Okay. He, right up front, half a dozen pages on that issue. Disappointing, discouraging to discover that, right? I don't think Ian Murray mentioned it. Guess what? Neither did Perry Miller. Neither did Ola Winslow. Perry Miller's an atheist, was an atheist. Doubt it if he is now. He's dead. And Ola Winslow had no special love affair for Jonathan Edwards. There's something about, this is so important for all you historians, there's something about the times, right, that put pressure on us to see what we ought to see or not see what we ought to see, or feel or write about what we ought to about. And so that Murray didn't mention slavery may not be owing to a whitewash, but something else. I just throw that out there. It's good to mention the flaws of our heroes.
Yeah, that was actually the very next question I wanted to ask, is how do we think about our heroes who not only are sinners, as we all are, nobody should be surprised that our heroes sin, but what do we do with significant, ongoing blind spots and sinfulness that is unrepented of? So we're just coming off of the MLK events, and many white conservatives recoil at celebrating King because of his rampant adultery. But we aren't quite as quick to ask about somebody like Edwards who owned another human being and did that because that other being's skin color was different from his own. And so that person couldn't worship where he wanted or travel where he wanted or organize his day how he wanted. He was owned by Jonathan Edwards.
Yeah.
Or somebody like Martin Luther, who, as far as we know, did not repent of inexcusably vile things that he said about Jews. So how do you handle that as you're looking at your own heroes in your own so-called tribe? How does that work with sanctification? What sort of lessons does that have for us?
The first thing I would say is no one is helped by whitewashing our heroes, your heroes. No one is helped. And that is true of Martin Luther King. With regard to doctrine and sexual morality, I think the most important questions for white evangelicals emerge from the recognition of his flaws. Because the most important question is, why would a man who was liberal, probably at that age, at least he was in his 20s, liberal meaning he didn't believe in the deity of Christ, substitutionary atonement, bodily resurrection, whether he did later, open question. The reason, I asked Thabiti about this, Thabiti Anyabwile, last week when we were at T4G. I said, isn't the reason we need to just come to terms with that is because the hardest questions for us emerge from that observation. Namely, why would a man who doesn't believe what we believe and was not as sexually pure as we might like, see injustice more clearly, act on it more effectively than we did? I'm saying we. I don't mean generic. I mean we. I was a racist, segregationist, defending, keep the blacks out of White Oak Baptist Church 16-year-old. So I don't have to imagine what it was like. And that forces me to ask, so why did he get this so clear? And why could he address it so effectively? And why would he be willing to give his life for it when he didn't believe this, this, and this, and he had mistresses on the road? Why would that be? Well, that's more of an indictment of me than him. Because it raises the question, what was wrong with you? So the point there is, you don't benefit by whitewashing your heroes. You won't ever ask yourself the hardest questions about life if the people you love are whitewashed and you don't ever come to terms with their sinfulness. That's the first observation. It will force us to deal with the doctrine of sanctification in a way like not much else will. What levels of complexity of morality might God be willing to wink at? And you say, whoa. God doesn't wink at anything. Yes, he does. I'll give you a couple examples. Half you in this room are wrong on baptism. It's a sin to be wrong on baptism. Maybe I'm wrong. And if I am, that's a sin. It's a sin to say false things about God and His Word. You think you're going to go to hell for getting baptism wrong? What do you call that? Unrepentant sin's what I call it. Which means that there must be some kinds of sin. Here's another one. 1 Corinthians 6, remember what they're doing? They're going to secular judges to settle disputes. And Paul says, you idiots, don't you know you're going to judge angels? Isn't there anybody in the church that can settle this dispute? And you're going before secular judges? I mean, he's upset. That's wrong. And then he makes it even worse. He says, and why aren't you just willing to be wronged instead of suing your brother? So these people are getting, at best, a C- in sanctification. They're going to judges and they're suing their brothers. And Paul says, both of those are wrong. You should just be wronged. And he didn't do church discipline for either of those. Why? I don't know. So I'm just raising how complex sanctification is, that if you spot somebody in history who did something you think is wrong, you got layers of issues to work through rather than jump into the conclusion they didn't repent, therefore they're going to hell. And you know, realistically, I think the lesson for us who live is not what do we do with our dead heroes, but what do we do with our living sinners? If you know somebody who's sleeping around, or if you know somebody who's racist and hates somebody of another ethnicity, your job is not to write a dissertation on, if he was my hero and I should write a book about this, how to handle my heroes. No. You should go to them and warn them. They're going to go to hell if they don't repent. Because God knows who's not going to hell and who is. The Bible just says if you don't repent, you're in big trouble. And we got a chance. We're alive. And so we should go to people and initiate Matthew 18 and try to win them back into holiness. And another thought comes to my mind, namely that if you see in Edwards, Luther, Dabney, If you see sin, you should flag it, wave it, acknowledge it. That's why this book says faithful, flawed, and fruitful. Flawed, put that right on the cover. If you see it, you should wave the flag and then be alert. Where might that sin have infected the theology I love? Right? So I love Jonathan Edwards' theology. It didn't keep him from having blind spots. So, why not? Well, is there something about it I could discern where it needs to be tweaked so that if he got that right, he would have gotten this right? That's a huge benefit from acknowledging the sins. It makes us intensify our vigilance over our appropriation of their theology.
So really, by taking their sin seriously, their flaws seriously, you can go deeper into their theology and have deeper application into your own heart.
I hope so, yeah.
I think of all of the people that you wrote about in there, a lot of them are similar to you theologically. C.S. Lewis might be as far to the left of all of the 21 men who were in there. Yeah. Some folks know that I wrote my dissertation on influences in your life. Edwards and Lewis, the two folks you never met, and your parents as fundamentalists, and Dan Fuller as your mentor at Fuller Seminary. And my argument was, you take any one of those four away and you have a different John Piper. At least that was my thesis that I tried to demonstrate. So I think if somebody were to try to think through if John Piper had never read Jonathan Edwards, how would he be different today? We could all probably venture an answer there, but maybe Lewis would be less obvious. If you had only read Edwards and you had the same upbringing and you went and studied under Dan Fuller, how would your life be different with no Lewis as part of it?
Can I say something about Edwards too?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I love both of these men. I don't think I would have liked C.S. Lewis very much in person. Maybe not Edwards either. I don't know. That's one of the great things about being dead. You can have more friends in the grave than you can in person. I don't think I would have a clear grasp on what I mean by Christian hedonism without Jonathan Edwards' end for which God created the world. Because my little sentence, God is most glorified in you when you are most satisfied in Him, is a paraphrase of Edwards, who said that we glorify God in two ways, namely by knowing Him truly and loving Him duly. Delighting in Him, rejoicing in Him is how we glorify Him. You could read all day long, every day for a year and not find that in hardly any theologians anywhere. And you find it in Edwards, and that was huge. And secondly, with Edwards, I doubt that I would have preached with a Christian hedonist set of assumptions, because his sentence, I regard it as my duty to raise the affections of my hearers as high as I possibly can, provided they are raised by nothing but truth and in proportion to the nature of the truth. When I read that, I said, that's it, man, I'm done. That is right on. That's exactly the way I want to preach. I want to raise your affections as high as I can and not have it be emotionalism, but rather warranted by truth and in proportion to the ugliness of hell and the beauty of heaven. Okay, that's Edwards. Lewis is not a model for me theologically. I don't think I learned any theology from C.S. Lewis, okay? I might have. But I loved it. When I met Lewis in college, I'd never read Lewis as a child. I don't think my parents knew he existed. So I never read the Chronicles of Narnia or anything else. First thing I read was Mere Christianity in my freshman class. And when I read it, I thought, this is amazing. And here's Here's some of the effects it has. He is more razor sharp, logical than anybody I have ever read. Just brutal with the law of non-contradiction. Nothing gets by C.S. Lewis. Not one whiff of an illogical assumption gets by him. And you watch him dismantle craziness after craziness in the modern world, you just laugh out loud with joy at the application of the law of non-contradiction. And you might think, well, that's pretty cold. No, it isn't cold. It's red hot and warm and sweet and wonderful, because the other thing is that I don't think I would see trees. Quiddity. The quiddity of things. The thisness of things. Black fake leather. Just the quiddity of things. Soft and squishy. Corduroy that my wife hates for me to buy because the seats get shiny. And I like corduroy. You wouldn't even see corduroy or shiny seats without C.S. Lewis. I hear the first robin. It's almost time. I know when the robins show up. I know what tree he'll be in between here and my house. He's always in the same tree. I wouldn't even hear a robin. I know what a robin sounds like, different from all these other birds around here. They come back. They come back to Minnesota. Lewis put eyes in my head because he has eyes. He has eyes that are off the charts, perceptive. So those two things, I doubt that I would be writing poetry. Maybe I would be, but Lewis modeled for me. I don't think Edwards ever wrote a poem, right? Never wrote a poem. I'm writing poems all the time. Lewis tried to be a poet. He felt like he was a failure as a poet, so he decided to write children's books and essays and other things. But he had the eyes of a poet. Here's an example. I recently started reading up a biography of Isaac Watts. Now, you know what Isaac Watts is known for. What did he do? He wrote hymns, hundreds and thousands of hymns. He wasn't known for writing hymns in his lifetime. You know what he's known for? He wrote a book on logic. It was used in all the schools. A hymn writer is known in his lifetime for a book on logic. It's still in print. When I heard that, I said, that's my man. I want to read about this because that's what I want to be. I want nobody to come away from my sermons aware of any logical inconsistency. None. And if it's there, I want to know about it. Because I think your brains were created by God to think with coherence and clarity, and you love it when that happens. You don't even know you love it. You couldn't even put names on the law of non-contradiction. What in the world is that? You use it every day. Yes, you do. And you want your preacher to not be stupid, not to say, I'm trying to make this up on the fly. All cows have 4 legs. Fido has 4 legs, therefore Fido is a cow. If your preacher does that, you're going to laugh, and you ought to. That's not good logic. All cows have 4 legs, Fido has 4 legs, therefore Fido is a cow. Lots of preachers preach like that. Lewis wouldn't sit through that sermon. Oh my, what he would write the week after that. And it would be vibrant with the flies on the wall in the sanctuary. So those are at least two or three things with Lewis that to this day, I've got this thick book at home called The Shorter Writings of C.S. Lewis, Essays. It's just huge, 900 pages, and I've got it on audio, my phone. And sometimes I just pull it down to open my eyes.
The other day I tweeted about this conference and described it as a bunch of my favorite living guys talking about a bunch of my favorite dead guys. And the first person to respond said, I think Packer is still alive. I wasn't trying to break some subtle news by saying that.
I'm sure he'll forgive you.
What is it about J.I. Packer? We're going to hear from Sam Storms tonight about Packer.
Looking forward to it.
Packer he doesn't razzle-dazzle people. There's nothing gimmicky. He's the only one of everybody we're going to consider that you've actually met in person.
That's right.
What is it about it that gives his writing and his teaching particular power in your view? Why is it that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to be reading Packer and won't be reading the current bestsellers in evangelicalism?
Piper! Wouldn't you go hear or read a man if you heard that a 17th century Puritan had been raised from the dead? I would. There's nobody, maybe Sinclair comes close, Sinclair Ferguson, but there's nobody that embodies the redwoods of the 17th century like Packer, which means unashamed admiration for the doctrines of Calvinism and the sovereign grace of God in the salvation of sinners through the substitutionary atonement and the irresistible work of God's grace. It's no shame. This is glory. A big, big God. And knowing Him changes everything, right? Knowing God. And a soul doctor like few theologians. Packer has never written an academic theology. Maybe Sam will talk to us about this. I think he's closing out his life dreaming of catechism. He wants to catechize the church. This man is brilliant. He knows all about contemporary theology, and he never wrote a systematic theology. He loves the church. He loves the human heart. He loves lost people. And he's constantly bringing the bigness of God into connection with the practicalities of struggling to live the Christian life. Hot tub religion, for goodness sakes. That was the latter-day Packer. He wouldn't have written that in his early years. He would have considered that squandering his verbal talents. But he did loosen up at the end. And a blood earnestness about life that isn't dour. He's a really quite funny man in a British sort of way. No offense to Michael Reeves and all the other Brits here, but Brits have a hard time yucking it up, And yucking it up is not a great goal. And they don't like us Americans by and large because they think all we do is yuck it up, especially when we preach. Not Packer. His delight in life and his humor are amazingly woven into a blood earnest seriousness about God and the world.
I think we have time for just one more question. Before we do, just mention this book that we've already talked about, 21 Servants of Sovereign Joy, Faithful, Flawed, and Fruitful. At Mark Dever's suggestion, we collected all of these 21 different biographies published over 7 volumes in the Swans Are Not Silent series. I think it's $120 if you were to buy all 7 volumes. They're selling this tonight for $16.
That's
so if you
incredible.
go out there. Yeah, what percentage that is, I don't know for the discount, but it's good. So you can go pick up a copy of this. But John, last question. Of all of the men that you have studied, we've got 21 collected here. If you could go back in time or bring forward some of those dead heroes, whom would you want to sit down for counsel? Whom would you want to hear preach a sermon? And to whom would you want to ask a theological question?
How much time we got?
1 minute.
2 minutes. My watch says 2 minutes. Quick, covered up.
We'll go with your watch.
All right. We'll be short then. I would want to hear Edwards just because I love him, and I wondered how he did it. I don't think it would be that great. I'm told he put his elbow on a cushion, held his little notes like this, and read in a fairly subdued. And the reason he had power was his earnestness and his content. So I'd want to hear him, and I want to hear Whitefield, and I want to hear Spurgeon, because I don't have any idea how they made themselves heard to 20,000, 30,000 people. I would love to hear a voice that could do that and bring tears to people's eyes, so Whitefield and Spurgeon, just for the power that they must have had. What was the other one? The counsel and theological question. Yeah. Let's just go to the counsel and end. I had some notes in here, but I won't look them up. I would go to George Mueller, the orphanage founder, who was renowned for answered prayer, so that it would be 8:15 in the morning and they didn't have enough breakfast food for the kids, and he assembled them for breakfast and expected God to have the truck there, and it came. And he prayed that his wife would not die of rheumatoid fever, and she died. And he preached at her funeral, and his text was, "The Lord is good and does good. He was good in giving her to me. He was good in leaving her with me so long, and he was good in taking her from me." And I would sit him down and I would say, if you had a couple of kids who were not believers, how would you pray? That's what I'd ask.
Would you mind closing our time in prayer?
Yeah. Lord, we love you, and because we love you and want more of you, we love your saints, your flawed, faithful, fruitful saints. I love the living saints in this room, and I love the men who are about to put some of them before us. I love Justin, and I just feel thankful for this moment and this conference and the gift of the stories of dead strugglers. So build our faith, enlarge our hope, increase our passions, extend our vision for the nations, strengthen our churches, sanctify our marriages, make us better parents. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.